Phumulani, Minnesota African Women Against Violence recognizes the magnitude of burden on women, especially those that may be facing any form of violence during this pandemic. We would like to assure you of our continued resolve to provide you with the assistance and advocacy that you may need. At Phumulani, we provide advocacy services on housing, sexual abuse and domestic abuse, work-based sexual violence, anti-trafficking, and labor trafficking. We also offer healing circles programs, food support for families impacted by COVID-19, and resources referrals. No matter your situation as we navigate this pandemic, do not suffer in silence. Reach out and receive the help that you truly deserve. Call us at 612-251-9421 or visit our website at www.phumulani.org. Phumulani, meeting the needs of women and victims of abuse.
Hello world, you are welcome indeed to tonight's forum. My name is Collins Kofi Opon. You can call me Mr. Beyond. Tonight's forum is being championed by Phumulani in partnership with the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Tonight's discussion is on sexual violence in the African community from the African men perspective. The issue of violence, rape, and sexual coercion actually continue to torture the African community, displacing homes and keeping many victims forever traumatized from the experience. We are having this conversation among some leaders in the African community here in Minnesota to actually address the hard issues and discuss what we can all collectively do as African men to create a safer community and homes for women and children, indeed, as well as men. The panelists today are Mr. Vitalis Tita. He is a serial entrepreneur and owner of Better Greens LLC. We also have Dr. Richard Oni. He is the Executive Director of Progressive Individual Resources, as well as Mr. Ian Wando. He is the Principal and Founder at Makesi Creative. We are also joined by Pastor Simon Momanyi. He is at the Kenyan Community Seventh-day Adventist Church. At some point in this conversation, we're also going to be hearing some message from the founder of Phumulani, Madam Comfort Dondo. We are also joined by Ms. Atika Rolla. She is the Executive Director of the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. So please, wherever you may be, help me welcome our panelists for today. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please, you are very welcome to today's forum.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Awesome. So please, if you also joined the conversation, do me a favor, share the video, invite your friends, because this is almost like a taboo topic that is many a time not talked of in our communities. But as men, we believe that we have a voice, indeed, to add our voice to the sexual violence situations that go on in our communities. To begin with, I will read out a short message from Madam Comfort Dondo. She is able to join us tonight to actually welcome our panelists and viewers to the forum and share how important this forum is to the work of Phumulani. So yes, we're going to read out a message from Madam Comfort Dondo. She says, "Thank you and welcome. It is always a great honor when our fathers, brothers, and kings show love and support to our work. I speak today as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and now a mother and a community leader. This is a hard topic, and as you know, in our community, it is considered to be a taboo topic. But these conversations are important to say the least. So, with that, I want to say thank you for gracing us with your presence. This is the first of many conversations, and I will let you gentlemen have your space here at have your space. Here at Phumulani, we look forward to feedback that we can use to inform policies and make it a safe and more for everyone. So yes, this is the message from Madam Comfort Dondo, actually welcoming us to tonight's forum. So please, if you join us, you are also more than welcome to share with us your thoughts on what we have as far as the topic for today is concerned, which is talking about sexual violence in the African community. At this point, I would also want to invite Miss Atika Rolla. She's executive director at MINCASA. MINCASA is Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, to introduce the work that MINCASA does and why the organization decided to partner or sponsor this forum. So please, Madam Atika Rolla, if you can unmute.
Yes. Good evening. It is a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation of Against Sexual Assault is a 45-year-old organization that is committed to eradicating sexual violence against women, children, and throughout our community. This work is important. I have been the executive director for the coalition for a little over 2 years now. I am the first Black executive director of the organization, and I also send greetings from my board chair, Kenosha Davenport, the first Black chair of the organization. We have decided to partner with Madam Comfort, who has been on, previously served on the board of the coalition, because this is the work that has not been highlighted in our organization for quite some time. I believe that it has been my calling to be to lead the organization, and part of that calling is to reach out to our African communities here in Minnesota to have these important discussions. I know that it is at the forefront within my community and your communities as well, is that we should be providing protection and support for our women and children. So again, it's an honor to be here, and it is a blessing to see you men. And as Madam Comfort described it, kings having this discussion and talking about how we can stop violence against our women and children. So thank you.
Absolutely. You are most welcome. Thank you so very much, Madam Atika Rolla, for actually joining us to introduce your work as far as sexual assaults in the community is concerned. Of course, at any given time, if there's the need to bring her back on the screen, we will do so that we can have her views as to what the men, the African men in the community, are speaking about as far as sexual violence is concerned. I'd like to begin with you, Mr. Ian Wando. Mr. Ian Wando, if you can share with us about some of the myths that are out there with regarding to manhood or being a man. Can you share with us some of these myths? We grow up with so much myth as African men. So if you can enlighten us on some of these myths, please.
Yes, Mr. Beyond, my brother. Thank you very much for having us, all of us, this evening to talk about this very, very, very hard topic. Obviously, around the world, but specifically in our community. before I answer the question, I think one of the things that I want to let anybody, especially people in our community, if you have been a victim of sexual assault or violence or any violence, so to speak, um, I want you to know that there's help out there. I want you to know that as people in the community, as leaders in the community, as men in the community, you have somebody you can lean on, and please speak up. And with that being said, I want to jump into the question that you asked when, what are the myths about
Mm.
manhood? I remember growing up, and you'd hear about, having to be strong, and when you think about the traditions, and having to always be that man in the house. Um, One myth that I think comes to mind for me is that you don't have to always be strong. You don't, we hear about strength. We hear about money and power, and money and power being something that, in order for you to feel or show your strength, that you have to have money and power and strength. Um, and I feel, for me, that as men sometimes, um, there's a tendency to hide behind that.
Mm.
There's a tendency that as men we have, or we feel that we have to have, money, power, to feel like we're doing something, or that we're, brothers or sisters, or um, fathers or husbands, so to speak. Um, and sometimes I feel like, that might be a derailment,
Mm-hmm.
um, to how we conduct ourselves, or sometimes how we choose to be vulnerable, so to
Mm.
speak. Because I know that that is something that, as men, I can't show my wife, or I can't show my brothers, or I can't show the world that, as much as I might be trying to show that I'm strong, inside I'm falling apart,
Mm.
you know. And I think for me, those are the three that come to mind, is that we don't have to be all those things, or show or pretend to be those things, in order
Wow.
to be strong for ourselves, for our families, and sometimes, or most of the times, for our daughters and our wives. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Nwando. Now, at this moment, I'd like to bring in Dr. Oni, please. I know you've always worked in the community as far as behavioral situations are concerned. What are some of the myths that you can also share with us with regards to manhood and being a man, especially from the African perspectives?
Thank, thank you very much, Mr. Beyond. Coordinating an event like this is really, it's a bold move on the part of men. Um, I say that because it's not always all the time that people will turn around like this, especially African men. This is an orientation that we brought. Sometimes when we behave as men, it's what we learn. It's a learned behavior. It's a learned behavior to be strong. So many times we've been told when we are growing up that you have to be a man. What does that really mean? To our father, who always tell us when we're a boy, and then they will say, boy and girl, we think differently. And
Mm-hmm.
so they already inculcate this in our mind. And they say repetition strengthens memory. The more
Repetitions
you hear,
strengthens memory.
right, the more you hear that you have
Mm-hmm.
to be this way, even if you are not there, you act like that.
Mm.
And so sometimes men internally they're in pain, but they are told, they have been given that orientation not to express, to depress it, suppress that pain and grief. And that is why men die earlier than women, because we never express our feelings, and it's because of our orientation. How many times did we hear about men saying, oh, come on, don't be sissy? When you have your own son and he's crying, you say, come on now, you have to be a boy. And
Yeah,
so
boys don't cry.
boys don't cry. And that means no pain, no gain. In order to be a man, you have to have pain. You have to be able to tolerate pain. And that is why your father will say, oh, there's no gain without pain. You
Mm.
cannot be a man without going through some pain. And that
Without
is
going through
why
some pain.
even during youth, there's what they call cultural group youth, where they kind of test you to say, are you ready to be a boy or to be a sissy? And so we have all those terminologies that we use that people now shy away and to be whom they are not. A lot of time, men will say they're in charge. I always tell them, when you have a wife and you say you're in charge, you are just fooling yourself. You are not in charge. You need to understand that. And that is why people become manhood. They say, yeah, I'm a man. Well, to be a man means you have to be vulnerable, like my previous speaker said. You have to be vulnerable. Nobody is immune to be invulnerable. And so all those myths are not really what they are. That is why the name is called myth. It's not true.
It's not true. Yeah, I think at some point we'll develop the conversation to now connect to how even these myths are able to contribute to some of the sexual violence situations that we have in our community. Thank you so very much, Dr. Oni. I'll be bringing you back into the conversation. But now I'd like to bring in Mr. Tita, please, with regards to, now we want to actually move on to talk about how we actually identify the value of women and of course girls as men who have women in our lives. I mean, being it your daughter, your wife, your sister, and a female colleague. What have you learned as the true value of women and girls against what we were told as children, against what we actually know, especially from the African community? What have you learned as a true value of women and girls?
Thank you very much, Mr. Beyond. I want to thank you for the invitation to be here on this important discussion. And I also want to thank the sponsors for making it possible. Actually, this is a conversation that is long overdue. And as we will see probably in our conversation here, that it is also part of the problem that we're facing in our communities because we're not having this conversation. So this is really a really great accomplishment that we can start this. My prayer is that it continues, that it doesn't stop here.
Absolutely.
So in regards to your question, you see, I'm gonna come from a different angle. I personally do not assign values to women and then values to this, because there's only one value to humanity. We all have the same value. So I'm not going to assign value as if somebody has more value than the other. So it is equal values, the way I see it. The equality is the same, male or female. That's the way that's how I look at it in my house. What I expect, the same value assigned for my daughter is the same assigned for my son. But also, you see that the roles are interchangeable, because again, why we're talking about values is coming from the perspective that women can only do this, men can only do that. But we live in the real world now. I mean, can you tell me something that a man does that a woman cannot do? No, there's really none. So we cannot be talking values here. We're talking about how do we uphold the fact that it doesn't matter what sex you are, we are equal, because it's part of the problem. We're talking about myths. It's one of it. From the culture we come from, we look at a girl child as less valuable than a boy child. If you go back and you can see that most of our families sometimes have been torn apart because a man gets so upset that the wife cannot give him a boy child. Now, there's everything wrong with that statement, right? The wife cannot give him. Who said the wife is the one giving boy or girl, right? But again, that is the value that we've been able to culturally kind of influence the way we look at the sexes here. If you're a man and you don't have a boy, or the society looks at you as you're not man enough, right? And we all have those experiences. We can attest to those. So those are some of the things that I'm looking at. In terms of value, we all were born with inherent characteristics as male and female. And I'm a strong spiritualist. I believe in God and the fact that God created the man and the woman and assigned them here. There are intrinsic, inherent characteristics that he assigned to a man and to a woman, right? And those see that they complement each other.
Right.
If you look at that equally, it's a complement. It should not, one should not be taking advantage of the other. It shouldn't be that way. So for me, I see here the intrinsic problem is the lack of understanding in terms of associating values to a male or female, because that influence comes from the culture, the background, and the upbringing that we've come with up to this point. And it is influencing the sexual violence that we're experiencing in our community today. And so some of those things might be happening. We're wondering, we're asking questions. How is this happening? How come women are being treated this way? It's because of the value system that we've created to be assigning them to a male child and a female child, one having power over the other. And so when they grow up, they begin to assert themselves in that way. We are takers, right? We take what belongs to us. So to the point that we begin to equate women to property, how do you expect people to treat them equally? They'll treat them like property. That's the kind of culture that we come from, and we need to be addressing those things. We need to educate ourselves and the community that we live in.
Wow, that's amazing indeed. That is why we're having these conversations, to educate ourselves of the culture and then the value factor that we are talking about. I also have with me Pastor Phumulani, please. You are pastor of a very distinguished church, and then with your association with women in your life, what have you learned? And I'm not sure if you want to have a different view from what Mr. Tita said, but then what have you learned as the true value of girls and, of course, women in the community?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bihand, for this opportunity to have this important conversation. I agree with Mr. Vitaris, what he said. Women are very, very important in our lives. The Bible says we are all created in the image of God. We are God's children, created in the image of God. So the image of God is not one. I mean, it's not separate. We are all God's children, And one thing I've learned is that, when you have women in your life, when you are, my life changed the moment I got married.
Wow.
Because, there is order that comes with it. They bring some kind of sanity in your life as a man. And you start thinking about, you start ordering your life, and, thinking your perspective about life changes. And in many of the organizations, of the things I've seen around, women, have taken an important role in the community. I've seen a lot of, even in the church, where women are leading, they are doing amazing. They are doing amazing job in the community. And one thing I think I've realized in our society here, especially the African community, women, especially here in the U.S. and in Minnesota, to be specific, women have been empowered, and they've taken leadership. They've gone to, if you look at statistically, I was looking at even in just generally around the church, around the community, I've noticed a lot of women have gone to school and have been educated better than men, most of the men around. And that means, they are really doing way, way, way better than most of us men. And I think it's a wake-up call for us to realize that, we live in the 21st century. There is those myths that my colleagues have talked about, that existed. We don't live in that era anymore. We live in the 21st century, and things have changed.
Indeed, things have changed. Thank you so very much for your kind contribution. Bessie Nyankunu says, good topic. Thank you very much, Bessie. So please, if you also have any comments or any suggestions or anything at all, questions, please, you are more than welcome to leave them in the comment box and we'll read them at the right time. Of course, now that we've built the foundation into the conversation, we are actually going to be talking now about we're singing the praises of women. We're talking about how important and the role of the women in our community. How then and why then is this so that there is also very high rate of sexual abuse among women and children, especially with focus on the African community. I would like to get your views on what do you think actually causes this high rate of sexual abuse in women and girls in the communities. I would like to start with you, Mr. Ian Wando, please.
I think the simple answer to this, and I think my brother Vitalis put it really well. The idea of placing value as property on our women and our children and our daughters, the mentality that that's what they are, and as a property, you can do however you feel and whatever you feel with them, is the root cause. I know it is a cultural, it might be a culturally, put issue. But I think at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves as men, at some point, you have to ask yourself, there is the cultural aspect of this, but then there's also what we call what is right and what is wrong. So for me, I think, yes, we are placing value on our women and our girls and calling them property. And because of that, we've decided that it's okay for us to do whatever we want with them. And I think that is on us, cultural or not cultural. The Bible says, even the Bible says, the woman, when we think about the value, if somebody really wants to see how important a woman is in our life and in our society, the Bible says the woman will take care of the affairs of her home.
Wow.
And the affairs of the home include the man, meaning that she is that much more important, that without her, everything falls apart. And the pastor said that. The pastor said that. I don't know what I would do without my wife. I don't know what I would do without my wife.
Absolutely.
I would be falling apart. And so I will follow, because it is the right thing to do, my brother Vitalis's caution. We should not be placing any value. So I will not place value on my wife, on any woman out there, on any girl out there. I will say, you are just as important as I am. You're just as enough as I am. Without you, we don't exist. Without you, there is no world. Without you, we are nothing.
We are nothing. Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. We are actually delving into the main conversation, and I'm happy we are submitting to the fact that, yes, there are some things that we have always perceived wrong with women, and then we have to now begin to rethink our attitude towards women, especially in the area of sexual violence. I also want to throw the same question to you, Mr. Tita. What do you think with everything we've talked about the value, and even from your point of view, you don't even measure the value. You realize that, yes, whether man, woman, boy, girl, you place them on the same pedestal in terms of value. So you don't actually attribute value specifically to women. With everything going on, why do we still have cases of high rates of sexual abuse in the community? What do you think is causing this? Please, if you can unmute.
Sorry. The value system that we've created is part of that problem. Like my brother Ian has reiterated, but I cannot emphasize on that more, because if we're going to be able to move an inch in trying to dismantle this problem within our community, that's the first thing we have to address. Is that mindset. I think that's it, and it comes from a cultural background. So we live in a world today that, you know, the society, the societal composition of what it is today is not what used to be, you know, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. But yet we are still operating on values and cultural norms that were set in place back then. Maybe this was acceptable at that point, not anymore because things have changed. So there's certain things that are influencing that. And so culturally, like Ian talked about, it's definitely a cultural belief, right? It's something that is also causing this. The fact that, you know, the culture we come from, it says the man, you know, you have to assert your position. And part of that is, you know, you have to dominate in the area of sexuality and you have it by all means possible, right? So in that case, we do not value, you know, the intent of the other person. We do not think that their consent is valid. You know, we do not consider them at all in that picture. It's all about pleasing ourselves, and then that way that satisfies a certain, you know, ego that we have as men in our community. Another aspect that influences this is also that is the modern day technology. You know, with the emergence of social media, right? The exposure of that. Now people are able to interact more oftenly. Transactions in that area takes place. People can you know, simply just manipulate, you know, young girls and other women and put them in a position where they're not able to defend themselves, right? So the rise of social media and the influence of that is something that, you know, I'm just scratching the surface here, but if you look at it, it is really a deep problem. So that's another influence right now. So we shouldn't. So the only thing I can say in that regard as a caution is, as parents, please watch over your children with in regards to their use of social media. Watch them like a hawk. It is that important. Their lives depend on it. And then the third thing I'm going to mention is the what I call the shift in the culturally induced balance of power between a man and woman. Okay. We live here, especially for those of us here living in the diaspora, right? Like I think one of my panelists here mentioned that most of the women are more educated now. You know, they're taking positions in leadership, in business, in different things, and that's true. That's evidently true. That goes against the perception that the African man has in the power dynamics of a home between a man and a woman, right? And that is actually a problem that is eating us raw every single day, because we find those cases where you find him, the man has killed a woman, this one has poisoned that because of, you know, power shift. Now he has money, he wants to show me this. It is that power struggle. Now, back in those days, we used to have the rules were clearly aligned, right, Mr. Beyond? We know that mom was the one that takes care of the house, takes care of the children, cooks the food. When daddy comes home, daddy expects that he is going to eat, he is going to have sex, and he's go out the next day and go get the food that mom is going to cook. It was clearly laid out, right? But it's changed today.
It's changed.
You know, before you meet a woman and say hi, he's saying hi coming out of his Mercedes. You can't buy him a thing. You can't even buy him food. You come, you said, hey, let's get married. She already has a house. She has refrigerators and an overflow in the garage. You want to buy him pork, he's got a pig. So you are actually walking into a place where men these days struggle to find their place, if you will. And that is a problem that we have. Men are struggling to find now this new positioning, this redistribution of power that's happening now, and it is real. So we have to reckon that it exists and then try to find a way how we can live with it. But we're not talking about it. We're not having those conversations because they're considered taboo, and because it might look bad on the man. Hey, how can you be actually talking about the idea that you're going to share power and those kind of things? But it only takes a wise man understanding the dynamics of what the modern day society is to be able to say, you know what? I gotta have to change some things. I have to readjust. That's for us, the men. We have to actually go in and say we have to redraw, you know, how we think about these things and the perceptions that we brought with us that needs to go away.
Wow, thank you so very much, Mr. Tita. Indeed, we are still on the discussion on sexual violence in the African community. Uche, Michelle, Agwai has a question. She says, is the value placed on women in our community or in our African community stem from the long tradition of paying bride price? That men now think they own the woman. I will want to get your view on that, Miss Dr. Oni. And then after that, I'm going to ask you your main question, please, if you don't mind, to share your view on the question about the whole thing, because we're trying to find out why do men think that they are in control when it comes to sexual issues, and then is their way or the highway. So she is asking the question: is the value placed on women in our African community stem from the long-standing of tradition of paying bride price that men now think that they own the woman? Please.
This is interesting. Well, again, like we've been saying, it's a perception. A lot of time, like I said before, that when men look at themselves and see the role they play, they always think they are overlord over the women. And so a lot of things that lead to that is one of those things we've been talking about with all the past presenters or talkers that say, when we value something, we don't abuse it.
Right.
And so that shows how less we value our women. And as such, we need to have what they call change of mind. We need to look at the way we operate, because sometimes when we value things, we cannot afford to lose it. My presenter over there said, I cannot even survive if my wife is not with me. That is lost. So the same thing here, we need to look at this. It's our tradition. But remember now, a lot of time we put so much emphasis on culture. Now, in a long time, culture do changes.
Right.
A lot of times, people need to know that culture is not static. It's very, very fluid. And so when you live in Rome, you have to act like Romans. When you come here, you walk, a woman walk. So you cannot expect when you come from her shift as a nurse or whatever she's doing to come and cook for you. And if you value so much, you will not enslave your woman. I call it unwritten slavery. And that is
Unwritten
what
slavery. Wow.
Yes, because you just look at that and you say, okay, I just come back. We need to look at what you do to others. We need to make sure, do you want that to be done to you? If it's something good, that is what the Bible says. Do unto others. You cannot work 24 hours and come back and cook for your wife. The same thing happened here. But we put it on culture, saying back home. Back home, how many women have job to do? See, it doesn't work that way. The moment you shift us here, you are now accepting a different role to play in the house.
In the
You
house.
need to wash the bathroom like the woman would do. You need to cook. If you don't know how to cook, you need to learn it.
You need to
Stay
learn
in the
it.
kitchen with your woman, because you expect your woman to contribute financially. Back home, you have luxury of uncles, aunties, and neighbors that can watch your kid when you drop them off at school. Here, you don't have that. So why do we have to build it on culture? Why do you not say, okay, stay home, don't work, and I will supply you with everything? When they don't do that, then you have more abuse. You have more assertive behavior.
Okay.
And so that is how I see that.
Okay. All right. I'm going to bring Pastor Momanyi in. Then I'm sure you will also get your views on the next thing that we want to talk about, which is now actually we're shifting the focus a bit about sexual violence or abuse. Also, does it happen? Actually, the question, does it happen to men as well? If so, do men actually talk about it? How do men handle these occurrences? So, Pastor, I know you are privy to a lot of things in the community. And of course, Dr. Tony, I also get your views on that. And it's interesting that we also even had a question come on even before this from Henry Momais. Is it only women who are victims of sexual violence, or it's both men and women? So please, does it happen to men? Do we talk about it, and how do we handle it?
Right. So sexual violence is to both men and women, to answer the question that was asked here. And I like this conversation because men go through this as well. And as we've said, you know, if we do not balance, if we do not understand that, you know, we live in this society where things are different. As Dr. Oni said, when you start saying back at home, this is different. Women will use, you know, they have rights. I asked the same question in my forum, and the ladies are the ones who responded mostly. You know, they said they know their rights when they're here. They understand their rights. Number one. Number two, they the problem comes when they use it as a weapon. They use sex as a weapon to punish you. If you become stubborn, you don't want to, you know, you don't want to help, you don't want to participate in paying the bills or whatever, they can use it as a weapon. And a lot of men go through this form of violence. I call it assault.
Okay.
Because they go through it in silence, and it's embarrassing to tell other men that, you know, I am suffering at home. I'm not being I'm not being given
Say it, Pastor. Say it, Pastor.
I'm not being given this right. And then you're embarrassed to say it. What happens is infidelity comes in. You start looking at other women. You start, you know, bringing problems in your own family, because then you start, you know, that's when because if you force, you know, you cannot force yourself into a woman. So you start looking at other women out there, number one. Number two, some men who forget that this is a different century, they end up, you know, causing violence against women. You know, you even touching a woman, sometimes it's an assault here, you know, and it becomes a problem. I hope
it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we'll be taking more views on that. I know we are also time pressed. Who that says great men on the forum, and she comes in again to say, "Speak the truth, Pastor Mumanye." So yeah, I believe that we would definitely continue this conversation again, but probably we can wrap up a couple of more things. So yeah, Dr. Oni, do you also mind to talk about the kind of sexual abuse that men go through, and then how did they actually handle it when it happens to them?
Well, just like the pastor just mentioned, sexual abuse can happen and do happen to everyone, no matter your age, sexual orientation, gender, or identity. Men and boys who have been sexually abused also feel the same way like the women. They feel the shame, they feel the embarrassment, they don't talk about it, they don't go to therapy for it, and they're afraid to talk about it. And they become very traumatic situation. It becomes a trauma, people get depressed for that. So the depression carries everything. And there are more challenges for men to even agree that they have been assaulted, just because they see themselves as untouchable. And that part alone really prevented them from talking about it. Not only that, when a man goes out to say, my wife did this to me, people will look at you strange. They say, oh, over my dead body. My wife would never do that, even though they may be suffering for the same thing. But because you call him your friend and you say, this is what happened to you, he gives you a different look. The same thing with women, and that is why people are afraid to even talk about it. It's not that it doesn't happen to men. Men just try to say, I'm a macho and I will not talk about it. And they are dying in silence. And they are also internalizing it. And any opportunity, you see them lashing out. And you'll be asking, is there anything more than this? No, it's because what they have been nursing, what they have been depressing about it, they have been suppressing these things and never allowed that to happen. So to answer your question, it does happen to men. Men also have the same feeling of shame, anger, and disappointment that this thing happened to them. So when people say it can never happen to me, it's a lie.
It's a lie. Yeah, but then also we want to establish the rate at which it happens to men and in comparison to the rate at which it happens to women.
Yes, as we all know, men also have less than men. I mean, than women when it comes to that. The only thing is when it does happen, it's more of a surprise and a boomerang effect for men because of the way they see themselves.
The way they see themselves.
It's difficult for them to really, really accept it. And if you cannot accept that this is your illness, you may never receive treatment. So a lot of times that is what happens when you deal with those kind of issues.
All right. Thank you so very much, Dr. Oni. Once again, this is a community forum being put together by Phumulani and, of course, Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assaults. And tonight we are talking about sexual violence in the African community. We wanted to get the views and perspectives of some of the African men in the community on this topic. So please, if you have joined us, you are more than welcome to also leave your comments. If you have any feedback, we are very happy to learn about your feedback. Mr. Uwando, now we want to actually drive home the conversation about sexual violence because it definitely is something that we want to bring an end to. And one of the ways is having healthy sexual conversations with our family, our sons and our children. Is this something that you would do, or do you actually have these conversations with your children? And can you share the experience from such conversations?
Mr. Beyond, thank you so much. Everybody who has, had any kind of say. First of all, brothers, I want to thank you guys for having the guts to come and talk about this because it is something that we need to be talking about. I'll touch on two things before I answer that question. Number one, when we talk about, Pastor Momani said that when your wife doesn't give you, the goods, like we like to say it. Then we decide that we're going to, to exercise our manhood, so to speak. And that transforms into being violent. First of all, I will go back to what I said in the beginning. We always have a choice. And the reason, even the fact that you're choosing to be violent is a choice.
It's a choice.
It is a choice. And so we need to put that to bed. The second thing is when we don't talk about these things, again, it is a cultural shift, the way we think, the way we were brought up and where we are today. It is a cultural thing that we're not talking about that. The third thing I will say, men definitely and boys experience sexual assault, but women experience this and more, a triple, way more than men, way more than men.
Yeah.
And that's an issue. It's an issue that us as men, we have to look at ourselves and say, how do we change the way we are doing business in our homes? How do we change the way we're doing business in our society? When it comes to having a conversation about sexuality with my, I have a 14-year-old daughter and the rest of them are boys. I have to say, myself, it is a tough conversation to have. I haven't mastered how I'm going to have that conversation with my daughter. I'm still trying to figure that part out. And yes, I will be vulnerable and say, I don't know. Because I think sometimes as men, that's one of the hardest things for us to say. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't had that conversation. I've had that conversation in my mind. How am I going to have the conversation? But I haven't had the conversation. And I'm saying that, the reason I'm saying that is to drive home the point I'm trying to make. As men, it is okay for us to be vulnerable. As men, it is okay for us to say we don't know. As men, it is okay for us to go and seek help because that's the one thing we don't do. And part of it is a cultural thing. Part of it is the myths that manhood or you being strong, you have to suffer by yourself, with yourself, and figure everything out yourself. And we don't have to do that. As men in our homes, as African men who are dealing with a cultural shift of where we grew up and the country that we call home now, we're struggling with that. And it's high time that we just have a conversation and say, you know, we're not in the same place anymore. One of my brothers said, we're living in a country where rights are actually upheld, where the law is actually upheld. And we have to come to terms with that.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Definitely, we are learning a lot. And again, even as men, we are able to take feedback. We are able to take suggestions as to how we can handle some of these situations. Mr. Tita, please, if you want to come in on this, as to how and if you actually also have sexual health conversations with your children, being it your sons, your daughters, and can you share any of that experience with us?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Beyond, for that question. And I think my brother, Mr. Wando, has really kind of touched on that. It's a sensitive topic, and we come from a background. As one thing we should really acknowledge here, you see, you cannot be sick and then trying to help somebody else. One thing we need to acknowledge at this point is that we as African men, we are sick. We are being influenced, whether you like it or not, you are, as you know, of these cultural values that we grew up. You see, they are very subtle. They creep in, and then certain actions take place, and you wonder why. So these are things that are in our subconscious. They become part of us. They become part of who we are. But then, because of the lack of the awareness that exists, things keep going on, and we try to fix it. Somebody's like, no, I got to stop this character. I got to stop this behavior, but they find themselves hard to actually change that. They're saying it, they want to do it, but they're not able to because they do not know the root cause of the problem. If you don't know the root cause of a problem, there's no way you're going to treat it. So I want to establish that. It's very important. Now, in terms of the conversation, of course, you know, we influence. That's not me growing up in my home with my parents in Africa. We never had that conversation.
No.
Right? It never happened. It was a taboo. All we knew was don't talk to girls and girls don't talk to boys, period. And you know the consequences when you do. So that was it, right? But we are not being explained as to why these things have to be the way they are. And now we've come here, we've been exposed to much education and knowledge. We know better. We have to have those conversations, no matter how hard it is, Brother Ian. We're going to muster courage to be able to have that conversation with our daughters, with our sons, because we understand the intrinsic value in that conversation. We want to change that trajectory. We have to be able to have that conversation. But something is also very important that I want to mention here. You know, you cannot have that conversation with your daughter or your son when you don't even live with them. Look at the disintegration of our homes within the African community. Divorces are rampant. Separations are everywhere. And like we talked here earlier, if we're actually honest to come and sit down and talk about our sexual or all this stuff, sexual health, other health, mental health, the relationship health, all of that stuff. If we are able to be honest and true to ourselves and be able to put that out there, it is so ugly. We'll just run away from each other and never want to look at each other again. It is that ugly, right? But we have to accept the fact that, you know, the disintegration of the family unit, because again, if you want to find why the society is acting the way it does, go and look at the family, because that's the production, that's the factory. The kid grew from there. Those values were taught from there. He learned them from there. He grew up thinking he's a man, and as a man, this is the way he's acting. He learned from that, the influences of his society and the people that surrounded him. But the disintegration of that, of the lack of fathers in homes, it's a problem. And it's part of this problem. You have to be there to be able to provide that education for your own son and daughter to see the way you treat their mama, because it's part of that. If you're not there, now all of a sudden the family disintegrates. Somebody else is coming into the home. They're also fighting for their own interest. The kids are now vulnerable. They take advantage of them, and you're somewhere else. So you see that whole dynamic. Yeah. And that's not something that culturally, as we're speaking of culture, that's one cultural value that I think we want to keep. That is not part of us. We don't come from a background where families disintegrate like that. We used to see our parents be there, they slog it out, they tough it up, they always be there till the end, right?
Yes.
So, yes, I do have those conversations, but the approach is very important. You have to gain we have these teenagers. They're too smart. They are too smart, way smarter than we are when we were at their age.
True.
So you have to understand that. Figure out a methodology that will work. Gain their trust, their confidence. Be their friend. Be somebody who's going to view as their trusted confidant. They can come to you for anything.
Anything.
And then those conversations are just going to go smoothly. And then we're going to be able to dispel some of this stuff.
Wow. Thank you so very much, Mr. Tita. Actually, Pastor Simon Momwayi sent a text and says, be an example of the way you treat your wife. They observe carefully. I just brought that in also to corroborate with what you said earlier with regards to how the treatment of women in the house are also concerned. Pastor Momwayi, I know we are pressed with time, so I think we'll just jump to the last part of the conversation. That is, how can we collectively end sexual violence? How can we uphold our values and our traditions and adapt them while we also meet today's standard? So there are a couple of things that is at stake: how we can end sexual violence, how can we uphold our traditions and values, but then also in very constant sync with today's standard. So, and that would be mostly our concluding remarks for today. Of course, our concluding conversation for today. I would like to begin with you, Dr. Oni. Oh, no, actually, I'd like to begin with Pastor Momwayi, if you don't mind, to start that for us.
All right. I think this conversation is a good start. Having such conversations as a community is very important to remind ourselves. And as my brother said, we need to have we need to think about there's a lot of separations, and how can we be there for our children to show them an example. Number two, how do we we need to re-educate and remind ourselves that we live in a different century. We are not. It's wrong to force yourself on a woman. It's wrong to touch inappropriately. There's a lot of, when we talk about sexual assault or sexual violence, it's very broad. It's important that we remind each other about this over and over again.
Yes. Wow. Thank you very much indeed. The reminding has to go on. Men has to know that, no, we don't have any right to a woman's body when she says no. And that is what I pick from you. I know you have another responsibility to attend to, so I will let you go. But then I will be taking the views from my other panelists. Dr. Oni, actually, if you don't mind to share with us, what will be the way to solution to what is going on in our community? Because really there's several of them that we don't even talk about, that don't get reported. And it's quite crazy. Even fathers and daughters, it's crazy. What can we do to begin to lead?
I think we're on the right path right now for what we are doing right now. Education and awareness is very important, because all the time when you start doing those things, like I mentioned before, the more we do this, the more people will hear this. And the more we give information, they said information is power, but it doesn't become power until you use that information.
Use it. True.
So it's a way to get power. And so we need to be able to tell the women too that they have power. We need to encourage them. We need to listen to them. We don't need to minimize their reporting, because a lot of time men will say, oh, no problem. So we cannot continue to dismiss their issues. We need to take it seriously. We also need to make sure that we express some concern, like we are doing now, that we express some concern of what is happening to them, because it happened to us too. So why can't we just see the same way we see when it happened to us? So we need to be consistent. We need to be very assertive to tell whoever is doing that in the community that this is wrong. So we need to be our own keepers, brothers keepers, enforcing the rule, enforcing it within our own community. We don't need to have police coming to us when we know it's wrong. We cannot continue to look the other way when things happen. And that is what is usually happen. It's not my business. No, it's your business when it happens. You are the neighbors. How do you become a neighbor person when you are not listening to what is happening there? And what is happening there doesn't concern you. You cannot continue to do that. So some of these are the things we need to do, but we need to do more of this education and awareness all the time to say this is not right. And the more people are saying it, the better information that goes out and the better approach we have to continue to stop this mess. Because it's a mess, it's a public health issue. We need to see that too. That whatever we are saying now is a public health issue. When you assault somebody, and like one of my partner, one presenter talk about, that these are odd behavior that we say it's a choice. If you slap me, it's a choice for me to report, slap you back. If I don't slap you back, that doesn't make you a stupid person. It just tells you are the one to say, wow, I did it to this person and didn't say anything. So sometimes we need to see that your behavior is something you choose. It's a choice.
Something you choose.
Anger is a choice. Don't say somebody angers me. No. It's a choice. Thank you.
We have to build self-control. Indeed, we have choice to do what is right. Huda Momanyi says, I think the question should be, can we still uphold our African traditional values in a society that might consider our traditions inappropriate to some level? Is there a middle ground? Thinking out loud here. Thank you so very much. So yes, in our concluding remarks, also, I would like to bring you in, Mr. Ian Wando. How do we find the level of solution to sexual violence collectively as a community, and especially from the input of men? And how can we uphold these values, even the way Huda says it, that might consider our traditions inappropriate to some level? How do we set African tradition? Okay, uphold, yes, that's value that's defined inappropriate.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. My sister Hulda, thank you for that question. And I think the short and sweet answer to that is that we can uphold our values. And I think for the most part, when you think about all the other things that we do as Africans or as immigrants, we uphold our values, from the foods that we eat, the way we dress up, and all those things we do. But I think today what we're really talking about, hitting a woman is not a tradition.
Never.
Okay? So there's not, I don't think I can equate those two and say, are we upholding our values, right? Sexually abusing a woman or a man is not a tradition.
No.
It's a behavior and a choice, a bad behavior and choice. Okay, so I think for the most part, when you think about all the other things that we do, we dress up, we eat, we talk, we do uphold our values. We tell the government here that we came here, we're Americans too, so you need to include our values and our traditions in the society. We do all that already. I think the topic today is that as men in our community, what are we doing to stop this scourge and this problem in our community?
Right.
What can we do? I think a lot of the things that we should be doing have already been talked about. I want to talk about something a little bit serving, which is, as men, we have to be vulnerable. And I think that's one thing. We have to learn to be vulnerable.
Right.
Number one, we have to learn to be vulnerable and say, listen, guys, we have an issue. The moment you do that, we have these conversations. We should not have to come on the camera, on live TV, to talk about this. Vitalis and I should be talking about this. Dr. Oni and I should be talking about this. Beyond me and you should be talking about this when we're sipping those beers that we sip all the time. Right? We should be doing that already. And we should really, before you teach or help anybody, we should seek help ourselves first, which comes from you saying, you know what, the first step to healing is admitting, which means you're saying I'm vulnerable and I need help. And then the last thing that I'll say, in the same breath that we say that we are the men and we're strong, we should be good stewards of our families. We should be good stewards of our community. We should be good stewards of everybody. And just walk in that light and say, you know what, how am I going to make my life better? How am I going to make my brother's life better? How am I going to make my society and my communities, well-being better? How am I going to protect my family, my wife, my daughter, Oni's daughter, Vitalis's daughter in the community? How am I going to do that? Because that's a responsibility that we need to be putting on ourselves. What are we doing to better ourselves and our community? Thank you.
All right. Thank you so very much, Mr. Wando. Mr. Tita, please. We are actually drawing close. Actually, this is the ending part of the conversation. And now we want to know, what can we do? What steps can we take to really provide solutions, to bring an end to sexual violence in the community, and also with regards to the tradition and our values as well. Please, if you can touch on that, then when we come back and give each of you at least 30 seconds for your final thoughts, please. Oh, so you are muted, please.
I keep doing that. Thank you so much, Mr. Beyond. I'm going to start, for the sake of time, just go quick here. I'm going to start with a question that came from the audience, how we're going to balance it, right? And I want to agree with my brother Ian that, right is right, wrong is wrong. There's no tradition or culture that upholds beating a woman or, assaulting a woman or whatever. But this is the problem, that the same culture and tradition and background has allowed those things to keep happening, and then it become a norm. So somehow they become acceptable, right? And then now we grow into those atmosphere and those settings over and over. We see these things. Then in our brain, it sinks in. There's a download that happens that tells us this is okay. This is how I need to behave if I need to prove my manhood. You see the way the problem is. So then that's why that question is coming from that perspective, because somehow I think that they have perceived that that is normal. How do we uphold our culture where a man will be able to subdue and subjugate women? No, that's not our culture. It's something that has been normalized. And so that's the problem we need to look at. And what can we do to answer that question? I think I will agree with Dr. Oni that awareness. We got to first of all acknowledge that the problem is there, because we are hiding it. It's something, again, like we said, it's a difficult subject to talk about, as you presented it, Mr. Beyond. And it's true. Mr. Ian is saying vulnerability is going to be one of those key things that we're going to need to be able to move forward. Who is willing to do that? So the challenges here that we really have to kind of look at in terms of the approach. How do we approach to get people out so they can be able to be slowly adapt and understand that, oh, I am vulnerable in a safe place.
In a safe
I think that's the key thing. Vulnerability in safety, because at the end of the day, people still need to be protected, right? So that awareness, being vulnerable, but again, in a setting that is safe, but also, I think that we need to come up with some sort of resources out there. I think it's part of the reason why some of these problems just perpetuate, and victims don't even come forward, because again, what's the point? Now, the culture in which we live in here, especially here in the United States, the counseling system where you can go in and get counseling and services, they're not culturally designed to address some of these things that we have, because they're entrenched into a cultural background, and you need to have insight to be able to address that. So we need our own expert, our own therapists, ingrown from our own society. So like the sponsors of this program, can they be able to expand their services to see how they can groom and grow counseling services that are culturally sensitive, so that it begins to create a safety net where families can go in for counseling. The reason why our families are disintegrating and they're divorces everywhere is because these guys actually go in for help with some of these traditional counseling services. It doesn't work for them. We need to find something that can be able to address the challenges that we have. They get frustrated, so they give up. But if we have ours that has that training and that background, that understanding, I think it becomes that avenue where we can help divert and avert some of these situations from happening, because then there's a channel. They can reference them to there, they can refer them there, and things like that. And something that I want to just add last is, for those of us that have boys as children, teach them what manhood means. And I think we all know that. Thank you.
Wow, indeed. Mr. Henry Momayi had a different view. He says some of the view that lately men are more likely abused than women. And yeah, so we were sharing the views about how and what the experiences of men and women in the community and how they get abused. But Huda Mumai says, I think the question should be, oh no, I think I already took this one. She says, thank you, brother Ian Wando, for your inputs. I think that was when Ian, you were making your submission. She says, I loved how you are calling our men to take personal responsibility in protecting our families. I cannot thank you enough, gentlemen, for being on the program. I didn't think we were going to go this long, but then later I realized that yes, conversations of this kind are mostly intense. So I appreciate your patience to stay with us this far. Please, if any of you has any closing remarks for 15 to 30 seconds, please go ahead and let's have your closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Bion. Let me just start and say I want to appreciate you for being able to host this in partnership with the sponsors. I want to appreciate them for their effort, but I want to also call on them that there's room to do more, and community leaders and people that love our community to see that things are changing, like those of us on this panel. We are available to however capacity we can afford our help to you. So reach out if you can. And I think there are more people out there, but you have to create avenues for people to come in and be able to give their 2 cents. I think collectively, I think that will be the way we can be able to move this agenda forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. You are very welcome. Dr. Tony, would you like to come in at this time, please? If you can unmute, please. Dr. Tony, if you can unmute. Okay. Oh, sorry, you muted again. Okay, let me come to you.
You are the one doing it. Are you the one doing it?
No, I wasn't.
But this is very, very interesting. This is very interactive, and I think we are setting a new pace for the community, because some people will be looking at us here and say, what are we talking about? I'm sure many African men out there do not believe what we are saying, because they are being so brainwashed. And there's something that they say, don't confuse me with facts. I already made up my mind. There are some people that already made up their mind. Whatever we are saying today doesn't make sense, but the more we repeat it, the more it sinks into the head, because it strengthens your memory. When you hear it every day, they say, oh, they just talked about this yesterday. So maybe that would be a big drawback from behaving like animals. Please, we need to do more of this. And I thank you, Beyond, because sometimes you have back home, we have people that run around the community and said, the chief said we have to do this. So we like you now because this is media for us, like back home. And so we're able to do this and let people know what we are. And more importantly, we are the one talking about it, not somebody imposing it on us.
Right.
See, I like that part, because people like to tell us what to do, but they are not part of us. And so we are able to do things on our own. We should dismiss the idea that we cannot help ourselves. We can help ourselves. If we choose to do that, it's a choice.
It's a choice.
Thank you very much.
You are very welcome, Dr. Tony, and I truly appreciate your time and expertise on this. Mr. Nwando, please, if we can have your concluding final remarks, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Beyond. You have been a champion of creating spaces for us as Africans in so many different ways, and this is yet another example of how Dr. Oni said, thank you for creating this space and being a pillar in media and helping us really tell our own stories. Today we're telling a very hard story and talking about a very hard subject. Obviously, to all the panelists, brothers, thank you so much for coming out and having the courage for us to talk about this, because this is a cancer in our community. It's a problem in our community. To the sponsors, thank you for creating this space, but I will echo what my brother Vitalis said. Sponsorship is good. Let's do more. We are ready to have this conversation. We want to be partners in this conversation. Anything done to create more avenues, please do it. And I also want to thank our sister Comfort. What you went through is tough. Being able to tell your story and use your story to help our community takes courage. It takes courage to do that. As we know, a lot of women go through this, even men, and they never say anything about it. So it takes courage. Thank you for creating that space for us. And then I'm also going to say to everybody, and I know I said this in the beginning, to anybody in our community, woman, man, and in the general community that has ever experienced any kind of sexual assault, violence, I will come out on behalf, and I think the other panelists will share this, on behalf of our community. We are sorry. We are sorry that you have to go through this. It should not be happening in our community, should not be happening anywhere. And we will do anything and everything given the opportunity to help with this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, gentlemen. I cannot thank you enough. I truly appreciate your time, and I'm even more excited to know that we are willing to go the next step to really build on this conversation, bring the community together, and indeed find a way that we can drive home the point that sexual violence has no place in our community, especially in the African community. Thank you so very much once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You'll have a good evening.
Have a good evening as well. Of course, this has been a collaboration of Phumulani as well as the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And we have been having this conversation about violence, that is sexual violence in the African community. I truly appreciate your time, everybody, for watching, and especially to the panelists today, Dr. Oni, Mr. Tita, and of course, Mr. Wando, as well as Pastor Momanyi. I truly appreciate your time for being on this program. We also appreciate the support of the Minnesota Coalition on Sexual Assault, and as well as Phumulani for helping us carry out this conversation. Indeed, Huda says part 2 loading, please. Collins Beyond. Yes, we will definitely going to consider a part 2 for this conversation. And I think another way we can look at it is also to actually now integrate the women, because we've always heard about from the women about sexual violence. Now we've heard from the men. How can we integrate the conversation and build on that for the community, the safe community that we also want to create for ourselves? Dr. Oni, you are officially assigned to the chief of the African community in Minnesota. So let's continue the conversations like you have requested. That is coming in from Huda. Thank you so very much, everyone, once again, for being part of today's program. My name is Collins Kofi Opon, together with the production team here at African Let's Talk, led by Efia, and of course to everyone who helped to make this conversation possible. I say good evening and thank you so very much. Have a good night.
Well,